next belle is Helena Belles. Parents are Mr. and Mrs. Bratina, and she is escorted by Tom Bratina. Hobbies include cheerleading, hanging out with friends, and shopping. She's also the Helena Belles freshman class representative. Lydia Michelle Cobb. Parents are Mr. and Mrs. Stacy and Don Cobb, and she's escorted by Stacy Cobb. She enjoys participating in English and Thespian Honor Society and is an active member of the Church of the Highlands Youth Group, and she's involved in Pelham High School's theater. Caitlin Ashley Cook. Parents are Mr. William Cook and Mrs. Tanya Odom. She is escorted by... Are you Ashley? Are you? Joe, I'm sorry. I thought that was Judy. Jody Odom. Hobbies include shopping, hanging out with friends, and walking. Jessica Ann Ford. Her parents are Greg and Anna Ford, and she is escorted by Mr. Greg Ford. Hobbies include dancing, shopping, and hanging with friends and family. Our next belle is Macia Nicole Frederick. Parents are Mr. and Mrs. Donnie and Stephanie Frederick. She is escorted by Gage Frederick. Hobbies include dance, art, and community service. Our next belle is Madison Garcia. Parents are Benny and Jill Garcia, and she is escorted by her dad, Benny. Hobbies include playing soccer, watching movies, and shopping. Our next belle is Haley Nicole Gillen. Parents are Mr. and Mrs. Ronnie and Tracy Gillen. She's escorted by Mr. Ronnie Gillen. Hobbies include working on the yearbook at Pelham High School, the juniorettes at Pelham High School, spending time with family and friends. Next we have Tiffany Hogue. Parents are Steve and Cammie Hogue, and she's escorted by Dad. Her hobbies include color guard, pageants, and dance. Next we have Jordan Elizabeth Ingram. Parents are Mr. and Mrs. Jean Ingram, and she is escorted by Mr. Jean Ingram. Hobbies include playing softball, reading, and listening to music. Next is Gabrielle Nicole Ivy. Parents are Kim Rowland and Paul Ivy, and she's escorted by Rick Rowland. Her hobbies include color guard, dance, and drawing. Abigail Grace Manesco. Parents are Robert and Linda Manesco. She's escorted by Robert Manesco. Hobbies include baton. She's a majorette at Pelham, spending time with friends, and going to Bama games. Next we have Emily Gracie Maccabee. Parents are Mr. and Mrs. Sean and Nikki Maccabee. She's escorted by Mr. Sean Maccabee. She's involved in the youth group at Kingwood Church, loves spending time with friends and family, and is involved in juniorettes at Pelham High School. Next we have Sydney Nicole Parks. Parents are Brandon and Lauren Parks. She's escorted by Mr. Brandon Parks. Hobbies include cheering, photography, and art. Caitlin Nicole Peterson. Parents are Mr. Kenneth Peterson and Miss Tricia Peterson. She's escorted by Mr. Kenneth Peterson. Hobbies include cheerleading, shopping, going to and watching football games. Next is Mary Michelle Elizabeth Ramsey. Parents are Mr. and Mrs. Chris Ramsey, and she's escorted by Mr. Chris Ramsey. Hobbies include dancing, shopping, watching Alabama games, and She's the Helena Belles Senior Class Representative in dancing in the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade. Catherine Elizabeth Rice. Parents are Wayne Rice and Tara Milam. She's escorted by her stepfather, Robert Milam. Activities include peer helpers, juniorettes, and color guard. Next we have Caitlin Faye Rogers. Parents are Jason Rogers and Deanna Rogers. She's escorted by Jason Rogers. Hobbies include running, writing, and hanging out with friends. Next we have Tiara Shiantra Watkins. Her parents are Tyron and Rashonda Watkins. She's escorted by Mr. Tyron Watkins. Her hobbies include twirling, volunteering, and shopping. And that completes the first year Belles. Now these are the second year Belles coming up. And before the wind creates a problem, there we go. Our first second-year Belle is Sarah Elizabeth Anderson. Her parents are Mr. and Mrs. Tim Anderson. Her hobbies include community service, dance team, and shopping. Next is Carly Elizabeth Atkins. Mr. and Mrs. Mike and Missy Atkinson are her parents. She enjoys dancing, shopping, and community service.
Sorry.
Patricia Catherine Bianco. Her parents are Catherine and Joseph Bianco. Hobbies include apprentice with the Alabama Ballet, member of the National Honor Society, Spanish Honor Society, Mu Alpha Theta, and National English Honor Society. That's a lot of honor societies. Now we have Heather Colleen Boyle. Her parents are Mr. and Mrs. James R. Boyle. She enjoys running, church youth, and reading, and she is the Helena Belles historian.
Please go ahead.
Next is Ashley Reagan Bright. Her parents are Mr. and Mrs. Darren Bright. Her hobbies include cheerleading, hanging out with friends, and roll tide. No, that's watching Alabama football. Next we have Barclay Elizabeth Bullard. Her parents are Miss Tiffany Bullard and Mr. Sam Boschel. Hobbies include Pelham High School color guard, the Pelham High School juniorettes, and photography, and she is the Helena Belles Junior Class Representative. Madison Carolyn Crane. Her parents are Mr. and Mrs. Jeff Bolt and Mr. and Mrs. Kevin Crane. Hobbies include singing, writing short stories, playing musical instruments. She's also a historian for the Helena Belles. Makina Elise Downs. Parents are Mr. and Mrs. Scott and Susan Downs. She enjoys swimming, rappelling, and photography. Now those are different. She is the Helena Belles Vice President. Next we have Kayla Grace Dubberly. Parents are Mr. and Mrs. Michael Dubberly. Hobbies include color guard, playing the guitar, and horseback riding. She's also a historian. Well, when I was their age, I didn't like history at all. Next we have Anna Taylor Elliott. Her parents are Mr. and Mrs. John Elliott. Her hobbies include venture crew, church youth group, and zip lining. She's the Helena Belles Sophomore Class Representative. Next is Allison Gale Fain. Parents are Mr. and Mrs. William George Fain, Jr. She enjoys the color guard, juniorettes, and peer helpers. Lily Ann Gaston. Mr. and Mrs. Shane and Deborah Gaston. Her hobbies include venturing crew, band, and yearbook staff. She is the president of Helena Belles. Leave it to a meteorologist to have problems with the wind. Thank you for your patience. Catherine Miranda Gentry. Parents are Mr. Brian Gentry. Her hobbies include color guard, juniorettes, and reading. Gracie Victoria George. Her parents are Mr. and Mrs. Alex Camp. Her hobbies include playing the piano, shopping, and riding horses. Mary Ashley Herford. Parents are Mr. and Mrs. Mark and Tracy Herford. Hobbies include juniorettes, attending Westwood Baptist, spending time with friends and family, and a member of FCCLA. Hannah Elizabeth Hurst. Parents are Mark and Susan Hurst. She's the Helena Belles secretary and enjoys cheerleading, shopping, and reading. Erin Michelle McDonald. Her parents are Mr. and Mrs. David McDonald. Hobbies include PH's tennis team, singing, playing guitar, and beauty pageants. Next is Jacqueline Elise Pitts. Parents are Mr. and Mrs. Tim Pitts. Hobbies include cheering for PHS, hanging out with my best friends, and going to the lake house. Emily Ann Taylor. Parents are Miss Cynthia Stacy and the late Mr. Jerry Taylor. Hobbies include playing basketball, playing softball, and going to Ole Miss games. Hayden Carol Ragsdale. Parents are Mr. and Mrs. Jeff Ragsdale. Hobbies include cheering, hunting, and community service. Marlena Grace Rice. Parents are Mr. and Mrs. David Rice. Hobbies include band, writing, and photography. Anderson Alice Watts. Parents are Mr. John and Miss Christy Watts. Hobbies include volleyball, painting, and playing the guitar. Anna Catherine Wilson. Parents are Mr. and Mrs. Tim and Angie Ward. She enjoys playing the guitar, cheerleading, and community service. Savannah Lee Wyndham. Parents are Warren and Tracy Williams and Lee Wyndham. Her hobbies include dance, watching SEC football and baseball, and reporting for PHS News. And she's done this before. Courtney Elise Wood. Parents are Mr. and Mrs. Robert Wood. Hobbies include color guard, juniorettes, and shopping. Kylie Sarah Cole Woodman. Parents are Mr. and Mrs. Harold Woodman. Hobbies include Girl Scouting, math team, and the Venture Crew. She's also a historian with the Helena Belles. And Victoria Elizabeth Sajik. Parents are John Sajik and Pam and Warren Meeks. She enjoys color guard, shopping, and reading. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2012-2013 Helena Belles. And now I can spill the whole list.